Item 1 on the agenda. Excuse me, sorry. What's happening here, Andy? It's from mine.
Again. No, keep going.
Hopefully that's better. Thank you. So item 1, declarations of interest, please. Councillor Marcus.
Yes. Sorry, item number 15, I've got disclosable pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Could I ask the monitoring officer, please? My stepdaughter works as a fire person at the airport. Do I have to declare an interest?
Will the discussion affect her employment?
No.
In that case, I would say that you do not have a
Thank you very much.
pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to declare a very minor non-pecuniary interest in item 9, but after discussion with the monitoring officer, I have decided that I will withdraw from the chamber for that item.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just double check that item 16 is no longer on the agenda today?
Yes, I was just about to make that announcement, which I will do now, and that is that agenda item 16 has been withdrawn in order that more information can be presented to members and the conclusion of dialogue with unions. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 2, which is minutes of the previous meetings. Can I have a proposer, please, that those are a true and accurate record? Councillor Mumford, seconded by Councillor Watt. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Under item 3, Chairman's announcements, although we don't normally do apologies, I would just like to mention at their request that Councillor Guy is unable to be with us today because he's in London on IFCA business for us. Also, Councillor Legg is undergoing the preparation for fatherhood on the mainland. Councillor Molson is stuck on the mainland with transport issues. So their apologies. Thank you. Yes. We do have one further announcement, and that is that the date for the April full council meeting has been changed from the 2nd of April to Thursday, the 11th of April at 09:30.
Excuse me, Chairman, can I just add to the apologies? Councillor Nellam said that he couldn't get across due to the swell, not being able to pick up from Tresco.
Thank you. Item 4, I have no questions under Standing Order 14. Item 5, to consider reports from committees, including receipt of minutes, draft minutes for information. None of those. Item 6, to consider motions in accordance with Standing Order 12. I have none. Item 7 now are members' updates. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I have provided a written update which members may wish to ask me questions on if they so desire, but I wanted to use the time which I would normally take up by inviting the member of our Youth Parliament to the table to set out his priorities and explain a bit about the Youth Parliament and potentially how both the sort of young people he represents can be more included in some of the decisions we take. So Henry is sat over there. There's a space here, Henry, for you.
Hello, I am Henry Dean for MYP for the Isles of Scilly. I was elected by my peers, I think a year ago now, although I was the only candidate standing, unfortunately. So I went, if anyone's wondering, the Youth Parliament is like a parliament of young people. We don't get to make any major governmental decisions, but we represent the voice of young people. And every year we are the only other people, apart from the MPs, to sit in the House of Commons and debate. We debate the issues from the top 5 issues from the Make Your Mark campaign, which is the biggest youth consultation in Europe, with this year, or last year, depending on how you look at it, we had 1.1 million people participate. I can't remember what all the top 5 issues were. However, from those, we went to the House of Commons, and there we debated those issues, like I said earlier, and we voted on the top 2 that would become Youth Parliament priorities, one for devolved England only, and one for all of the UK. And from that, that's what Youth Parliament's going to be campaigning for. And I think is there anything, and those 2 were Vote 616 and Put an End to Knife Crime. And I think Vote 616 is a very important one, but Put an End to Knife Crime is very interesting, because over here we're probably one of the few places in the country that don't get much in the way of knife crime. And I think that's something we need to try and keep us away from knife crime, but still raise awareness so we know what happens on the mainland. I think if there's any questions about that. Okay. So yeah, any questions just in general?
Councillor Grottick would like to ask you a question.
Okay.
Henry, thank you.
I was just interested in Henry's perspective, because obviously we would like to help if we can help in any way with trying to address this awful problem of knife crime at the moment. Do you think it's because we know each other in the main? Do you think it's more because we're a small community? Do you think there's any lessons that we can contribute to the wider debate? I would say thank you for coming. It's very nice to see you.
Well, I think from my peers, we don't really, we have our times where we're a little bit, don't get on, but we never get really violent. It might be because, yes, like you said, we're such a small community. If you do something, we can have their parent knocking on your door saying, "What you do? What did you do to my child?" But yes, I don't. But with the internet and media, I think it's very hard. People know it's happening. Our position, although you didn't mention it, our position 28 miles away from anywhere else kind of doesn't really isolate us in that way because of the internet and all that, and modern media. But I think there are positives of that, such as we know what's happening. But I think also we need to raise awareness that it's not just happening in the big cities, it's also happening in smaller towns.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Henry. There were just 2 observations I wanted to make. Certainly your campaign about votes for 16, I think, is very relevant and one I support. I think it's easy to forget it's only in the last 100 years women have had the vote, and many of the arguments given why women shouldn't have been given the vote seem to be now being applied to why young people shouldn't be given the vote. So I think it would be a good thing. I think young people are certainly able to make decisions on lots of the national issues which are taking place, so I'm happy to throw my weight behind that. And also the issue around knife crime as well. Although it doesn't necessarily take place on our doorstep, I think it's probably fair to say that the amount of knife crime which is taking place means that we've got family relations on the mainland who probably aren't a million miles away from some of the atrocities which are taking place. So again, from an island point of view, I think it would be just good to remain aware of all those sorts of things.
Thank you. I would just like to say that Henry has got a prospectus a manifesto which Councillor Williams has copies of. So if any member would like to, who hasn't got one, would like to have one of those copies, then please ask Councillor Williams. We are obviously through that given the opportunity to vote for Henry, which hopefully we will do in due course. Henry, I would just like to thank you very much from the chair for your contribution today, which is excellent. I was very pleased to have been hosted by you when I visited the school, and what a magnificent job you did with some of your fellow pupils in taking us all around and not only showing us the school, but giving us a very clear insight into what's happening in the school everywhere. And it was excellent, and I will remember that. So thank you very much indeed for your contribution today. Councillor Davis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if I might make a short verbal report, mindful of what happened at last meeting. I did actually, being mindful of that, I did actually write a written report for this meeting, but due to my IT inadequacy, it didn't go in the right direction. So I wondered if I'd be able to make a verbal report.
Yeah. We'll actually take the written report first, if we may, Councillor Davis. But I don't think we've got any further written reports, unless you want to comment further on yours, Councillor Williams.
No, as I said, if members have any questions, I think it sort of sets out some work which is taking place in the next few months. If members have any queries, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Initially, I just apologise for my absence. I think you all are aware why I was away for several weeks over the Christmas period. That obviously explains the lack of reports during that time. I wanted to thank, I did thank in my abortive report, Fran, who kindly stood up and did whatever was necessary in my absence. I'm aware of how busy she is, and she was, the previous experience, obviously ideal to fill my shoes. I have managed to actually attend a couple of meetings since of the Isles of Scilly Social Care, Health and Social Care Integration Board. This meets monthly and is progressing well, but obviously at this stage, a lot of it is, should I say, bureaucratic and ticking the right boxes to get things moving. But two things that I would like to draw your attention to, two specific points. One is that I think that there is a strong feeling out, or there's a recognised feeling out there, that Park House, in order to retain its integrity, should be a separate building. I think that the move has been that it should be, should we say, in the campus up on the hill with the new development, but a separate building. And I see this as I think you all know already, extremely important to remain to retain a workforce and the integrity of the care we give. Just in passing, there was a bit in my paper the other day about a London MP who is an ex-GP who was having dreadful time with the care of her father, who was in care and was not being listened to. If they can't be listened to, I think it's even more important that we have control of our care here, which obviously we have at the moment. The other point that I was pleased to see and hear was that in the plans there's recognition of doing more in Scilly for those who need it on the health side, particularly obviously with IT, which is developing all the time, and in other areas. So those two areas, I think, even at this stage, are at the forefront of the thought of the development. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Very briefly update something I just heard this weekend, and it's pretty much unconfirmed at present, but apparently Smart Islands is in the briefing papers for the G7 summit, which I think is quite astonishing. I'd quite like to see it in Chinese. But I think that is quite amazing. There is no other bigger forum on this planet, and to have Smart Science Ireland in there is wonderful. However, I would say that's unconfirmed. I was just told, and it may not be the case, but I do hope it is.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, just a brief update about the local plan drop-in sessions. Next week, we're in Tresco on 13th, Tresco and Brighton 13th, St Mary's on the 14th and 15th. St Agnes and St Martin's, please, would urge the public to come along and give their opinions on the soundness of our local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 updates for this meeting, so it might be appropriate perhaps if I dealt with them both now.
Yes, please.
Right. First of all, to inform members about the very successful, well, in my view, hopefully, finance engagement meeting that we had last Saturday. We had about 16 members of the public attended, and they were all very engaged, listened well and asked relevant questions, which was very gratifying. Thank you to the officers who supported me. Mark Bowden was here, and Craig and Ashlyn as well. And then Nicola, who couldn't be with us, had obviously, Craig could handle any questions that came from her service area. Briefly, we went through a shortened version of the papers that you have in front of you today. Tom Walton had assisted me greatly in picking out the bones of the finance papers. So if anyone would like a copy of this presentation, they're more than welcome, and I can get you one later. We explained to the visiting members of the public how we intended to set the balanced budget, and then explained to them that we intended setting a council tax of 2.99%. This is in fact less than the council tax for the last 2 years, because we took the allowed adult social care precept of 6% that we were allowed to phase in over 3 years. We actually phased it in 3% lumps in the previous 2 years, so we don't have that this year. The average council tax over the country at the moment is, I believe, just quoted on this morning's news at 4.5%. And in fact, our average, our Band D council tax is the second lowest of the 56 unitary authorities in England. So although any increase is unwelcome, and we're sorry about the effect it has on our islanders, we have actually managed to keep it relatively low. We explained to the community the view of our 151 officer, and thank him for his help with this as well, that we were on the right track, but we're not complacent. We do understand that we still have to work very hard on our finances to continue to keep them on the right track for the next few years. And we're very grateful for the continuing support from all our officers and the 151 officer. Questions were asked about 1 or 2 areas, but in general, the fact that the council tax was going up by 2.99% seemed to be accepted by the islanders that were present as being a reasonable way forward. So that, unless you have any questions, is the finance update, or update of the finance meeting on Saturday, I should say. And then the chairman has asked me to, so perhaps I ought to pause a minute. Is everybody happy with that?
I would just like to take the opportunity of thanking the Vice Chair for her efforts with the consultation, public consultation on Saturday, and Tom Walton as well, because they put forward some very good slides and made it very clear for everybody, and the work was much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I would just say the slides were actually based on some work that Steve Sims did a few years ago, and so we in fact refreshed them.
It was Tom then as well.
Yes, indeed. Okay, fine. And then the chairman has asked me to comment on, to give the sponsor board update to members. If you're happy that I continue with that at this point?
Yes, please.
Right. If I could just give a brief history of the sponsor board, just to set the picture, if I could. The sponsor board was set up in June 2017 to monitor the collaborative arrangements that were set up following the inter-authority agreement between Cornwall Council and the Council of the Isles of Scilly earlier that year. The membership of the sponsorship board consists of, from Cornwall Council, the deputy leader of Cornwall Council. The sponsor board is within the portfolio of the deputy leader in Cornwall. Cornwall Council's 151 officer, their chief information officer, their technology manager, their assistant fire chief, and a representative from their legal department. It's quite well balanced from the Council of the Isles of Scilly. The chairman and the vice chair sit on the sponsor board, and acting as officers of the Council of the Isles of Scilly in this regard, our 151 officer, Russell Ashman, and Matt Stokes, our monitoring officer or his representative. In addition, our chief exec or his deputy or representative will also attend. So, to return to the history, it was recognised following the financial challenges on Scilly and the Section 24 notice of autumn 2016 that collaboration in regard to finance and information technology in the first instance would be of benefit to the Council of the Isles of Scilly. In order to facilitate this, we're given significant grant monies from central government. The chair of the Council of the Isles of Scilly is chair of the sponsor board. And as I have mentioned, the vice chair also sits on the board. The vice chair of the sponsor board is the vice chair, or rather deputy leader, of Cornwall Council. While the sponsor board was set up to monitor the progress of any collaboration agreement, it is clear that any decisions are to rest with the respective councils. This fact is underpinned by an important resolution taken and passed at the Finance, Audit and Scrutiny meeting in January 2017, where any material change in service delivery is to come back for ratification and agreement to full council. There have recently been discussions as to the possibility of further areas of collaboration, as this will also come into the remit of the sponsor board. But it is generally felt at the moment, and this has been articulated at both the November meeting of the sponsor board and the February meeting, that the collaborative arrangements we are currently monitoring need time to settle first. These are the new arrangements with regard to finance and information technology and other previous arrangements, for example, building regulation support, the appointment of a shared local authority designated officer with regard to safeguarding and legal support arrangements. Work has been initiated and is now complete to bring these, if you like, ad hoc arrangements over the several areas that I have just mentioned into the collaborative arrangements and to give them a more formal basis. Underneath the sponsor board, there is a steering group. Probably I might describe this as the operational nuts and bolts of how the arrangements actually work. Officers sit on the steering group, and the chief executive or his representative dials in usually from the Isles of Scilly, and the steering group usually discusses an area of responsibility for each meeting, and the appropriate officers from Cornwall will attend. There has been recent work in scrutiny to evaluate the progress of the sponsor board, and a good input from scrutiny has been to suggest that we must always acknowledge the social aspects of any other job losses, or if you like, transfer of service delivery models to Cornwall, because that will mean the loss often of relatively high paid jobs on the island, and that affects the viability of our community. So that, I think, was a very useful contribution. So I thank the Scrutiny Committee for that. It was also agreed that there would be reports to full council, of which this is the first, I believe. There is ongoing work in this area around governance issues. We will look forward to a contribution from our interim chief executive officer, who has a legal background, which will be very useful. We will be reviewing the role of the sponsor board and how it sits within the overall governance structure, within ongoing work within governance structure. Just to recap, I'd just like to emphasise again and hopefully reassure members that the overriding premise is that your chair and vice chair represent all members and have no delegated authority to act without sanction from full council. Indeed, we would not wish it any other way. Our colleagues in Cornwall fully understand and appreciate that we do not operate on a cabinet system, although we have had to clarify this on a couple of occasions lately. The present chair and myself are very anxious to support the ongoing place of the sponsor board within the inter-authority agreement, and would like to have a greater understanding, and we accept we have to work with all members, a greater understanding of the work of the steering board, the sponsor board and the steering board as they move forward. The next meeting of the sponsor board is in May, and if anyone would like any more details of anything that I have alluded to, I'm most happy to give it to them either privately or on another occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Councillor Grottick, for that. I'd like to see that report, a written report, if that's possible, next time, just so that we've got something to read and something to examine beforehand. And so can you just clarify for me what was actually discussed at the sponsor board this time? Is that possible?
Well, I'm a little bit concerned that I should be sharing in a public forum, Councillor. I'm not exactly sure, and possibly it's a fault on my part, exactly how much I can share at this moment in time. You will understand that various possible options for further collaboration have been mentioned, and that might give concerns to members of our staff. So therefore, I'm a little bit wary at this moment in time. So apologies for that. Very happy to continue the conversation in that area privately with you. I totally agree about a written report and can only say that of late, we have had quite a lot of paper coming in our direction. I'm afraid I just ran out of time for preparing the report in time to give it to you as a written report. What I will do is I will prepare, with the help of hopefully Tom Morton or Andy Thomas, I will prepare this as a written document and circulate it to all members.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, are minutes taken at this meeting?
Yes.
There.
Yes, but as Councillor Grottick pointed out, we did discuss this with Becky Lloyd-King, and some of the issues might be of a confidential nature. So I think, you know, with our discussions with scrutiny about this, I think we need to come to agreement in the future as to what is shared publicly. Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to give two updates from the chair. First of all, the Transport Board met last month after quite a delay, which is a shame. At this meeting, Nigel Blackler, who's Cornwall's lead officer on transport, was elected chairman. We welcome two new board members from Scilly, Executive Director of the Island Partnership, David Jackson, and Councillor Steve Sims. Unfortunately, for various reasons, the meeting was short. However, it was resolved to meet urgently for a full meeting, especially revolving around a replacement ship or ships to replace the Selonian in due course. Various options are to be reviewed at the forthcoming meeting next week on Monday, and look at work being done by the Isles of Scilly Steamship Group. Work is also progressing on a document or blueprint for our transport links with the user, i.e. our community, and our visitors' requirements at its heart. This will be used to evidence a single plan and requirement presented by the Transport Board on behalf of our community to inform the forthcoming visit of the Minister responsible for marine transport in a few months' time. I also have, sorry, are there any questions on that? I also have a brief update on the ministerial visits that we carried out this past week, where I attended with our 151 officer here, Russell Ashman. We thank you for that, Russell. And also our interim chief executive, Mark Bowden, and our MP, Derek Thomas. We met ministers on Tuesday to brief them on the challenges facing services for our community and the unique financial challenges for the Council of the Isles of Scilly. The beginning of talks with government on a range of funding and public services issues really for the islands. And with Derek Thomas, we met Jake Berry, MP, who's the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and with Nick Hurd, MP, the Minister of State at the Home Office. The case was made that the government system for funding councils based on population does not work fairly for the Isles of Scilly and has resulted in public services being significantly underfunded. In particular, council spending on the fire service amounts to £460,000 annually, with just £25,000 funding coming from government. That actually equates to £200 per household on Scilly, and if you compare that with Cornwall, it's only £20. We also raised the issue of social and affordable housing and the difficulties in building much needed new housing and maintaining existing stock caused by high costs and lack of funding. There was recognition from the ministers that Scilly faces a unique set of challenges, and they committed to look into all the matters that we raised. There was also agreement that the forthcoming review of local government funding presents an opportunity to find new ways of funding the public services for our islands. Meetings scheduled to discuss the vital issue of transport were unfortunately cancelled at short notice, and the Council is working with the government to rearrange these as soon as possible. This was a valuable opportunity to put Scilly's case to decision-making ministers who would not otherwise be aware of our particular circumstances. The two ministers listened carefully, fully appreciating and accepting our arguments. They both undertook to work with us in order to find solutions outside of the constraining formulas previously applied to Scilly, which may have worked for other authorities but clearly put us at a disadvantage. We will be following this work up hard in the coming weeks, and I have every confidence in a successful conclusion. There are now 3 ministerial visits to Scilly scheduled this summer, focusing on our key issues and opportunities. Derek Thomas, MP, commented that the opportunity to meet and work to ensure the unique and particular characteristics of Scilly are recognised in government policy was welcome. There is no doubt that together we have convinced ministers that central policies and funding formulas should not be applied to Scilly. It is now for ministers and civil servants to find a way to adequately fund and support Scilly towards a more prosperous, resilient and connected community. And Derek Thomas will continue to press for this across Whitehall. Apologies, members, for all the verbal updates today, but because the meetings were only last week and so on, and we were not in time to get them into our papers for you. But again, as Councillor Grottick said, anything that is required, copies of these can be made available to you. Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Thank you for the update. Without wishing to be pedantic, I've always thought that the fire and rescue was £200 per person, not per household. I think it's significantly worse than per household. It's about 400,000 and there's 2,000 people here. So right. I don't think it's per household, I think it's per person, which is a lot worse than per household.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the update, and congratulations to yourself and all the other officers, and all the support going into the ministerial visit seems very positive, and we hope that good work continues. If I may, I was just going to give just say very briefly, there was an AONB meeting last month. I meant to do a written update. I will do for next meeting, just as by way of a sort of public notice that the Natural England Marine Special Protection Area consultation is now open. and that's open until the 21st of May. We're going to discuss it in council, but anybody in the community can feed into that consultation. It's quite an important one for Scilly.
Thank you very much for that. Right, we'll move on to item 8, urgent items. I have none. Sorry, Aisling.
Sorry. So urgent item is, the chairman agreed I could just update you on the one public estate funding.
Yes, sorry,
that's fine.
did mean to.
No, and I'll be quick because you've got a lot to get through. So you will remember from the December full council that we submitted a bid to support the full business case for integration of health and social care, plus the housing solution for key workers. So we've heard back and we were successful. So we've received £250,000, £25,000 of which is a sustainable grant. So we repay it over 3 years. The deadline to accept the money is Friday. So there's 2 things I need to do before we spend any of it. One is confirm the match funding arrangements in the system. So that will be contributions from health and from the local authority if appropriate. And the second thing is make sure that you're happy with the outline business case before we move forward. So the outline business case is due to come to you in March full council, going to scrutiny in April. So my recommendation, and I'm going to do an executive decision which has been supported by the interim chief exec, is that we accept the money, hold on to it. The risk is that there will be clawback, but won't spend it. So I think I just wanted to let you know what I thought was a pragmatic kind of way forward. But it's a real achievement. The programme was heavily oversubscribed, but we had a very, very complimentary letter back that it was one of the best projects they'd seen. And when they announced the funding awards, ours was one of the showcase projects. Good.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Marcus.
So we're not good. So we're going to accept the money, not going to spend it. So there's no financial risk in this whatsoever. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 9, which is the report of Lisa, our Planning and Development Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This report sets out. Sorry, I printed the wrong notes. So bear with me. I've got rough notes. So this is a planning application for the construction of a pair of semi-detached dwellings, which are for use as disability-friendly, self-catering holiday-let units. The 2 units are designed to be occupied as 2 independent dwellings, but can also be occupied as a single let for larger groups. The proposal does not include any off-street car parking for its occupiers. Deliveries, refuge or emergency service vehicles would use the vehicular access that serves Branksea Close. Pedestrians will access the site from Church Road and Branksea Close only. There is no access proposed from Rams Valley. The 2-storey element is on the southern side of the site, which will be attached with a lower linking section to the single-storey accommodation on the north side. Windows and doors have been positioned to minimise overlooking towards neighbouring properties. Those facing the rear north or northwest towards properties at Castanix and Seathrift are either ground floor only or roof lights with 1 ensuite obscurely glazed bathroom window at first floor. The front southeast facing will primarily overlook the open space between properties on Branksea Close. There are 2 front facing bedroom windows which will have views over this area. The other 2 windows are obscurely glazed ensuite bathroom windows. The distances between the proposed first floor windows and those existing are not face to face, but are at oblique angles that are between 8 and 12 metres away. The applicant intends to maintain the existing hedge along this boundary, so ground floor windows will be behind this boundary feature. The existing garden site contains a number of mature fruit trees and a New Zealand Christmas tree, as well as existing greenhouse, which will need to be removed. As these features are located in a private garden, their amenity value is limited relative to that of public open space. The greenhouse structure is in a state of disrepair and the fruit trees are of a mature condition. The loss of these features is not considered to be harmful to the wider character of the conservation area. The design overall is considered to complement the features Features are found in properties in the vicinity using the rendering and the timber boarding detailing with a mixture of natural materials. One of the concerns for neighbouring properties is the construction of the 2 units which will connect onto the public sewer network. A public connection is always preferred where this is possible to minimise the proliferation of private systems and use of septic tanks. A number of representations make reference to this network being at capacity and regularly blocking. Having reviewed the consultation response from the Council's infrastructure team, we are advised that the network is not known to be at capacity. There is a record of a number of blockages in this area which the infrastructure team respond to as they arise. They have confirmed that the 6-inch mains and the surrounding 4-inch sewer network that crosses the site picks up all the connections higher up from the hospital down to this area. Most calls do relate to this area, Branksea Close and the rear of Rosebean and Gorrigan House, simply because the fall of the sewer line is at its shallowest in this area, not because of a known capacity issue. The consultation response from the infrastructure team does not object to the proposed development connecting into this public network, but it does request that the proposal seeks to minimise the impact of the network at peak times. On this basis, the planning department do not consider this a reason for refusal of the scheme. A pre-commencement condition is recommended to ensure that development provides adequate details of how this will be achieved before commencing development, should this application be approved today. The applicant has confirmed the investigations to understand the network issues in this area, which will be something he would do if permission is granted. This is on the basis of CCTV investigations into understanding the problems to ensure the best solution is found. And as this is a costly piece of work, he has confirmed that he would not look into this more until planning permission has been established for this proposal. Overall, the applicant is seeking to establish 2 new units of holiday let accommodation under existing local plan policy 4, in terms of demonstrably improving the quality of existing tourist accommodation and contributing to the further modernisation of the island's economy. Emerging policy WC5 of the draft local plan is similarly supportive of tourism developments. In providing bespoke disability friendly in a sustainable location where their wider impacts are considered to be acceptable, the proposal is subject to the conditions set out, recommended for approval. And just say some members did come along to the site visit last Friday and to have a look at the site, and I'll just run you through the proposed elevation. So the east elevation overlooks Branksea Close. Obviously, the north elevation faces the back of Menevor, the applicant's existing holiday let property. The west elevation faces properties to the north, Castinix and Seathrift, and the garden of Gorrigan and Rosebean that way. And then that's the elevation facing onto Branksea Close. It's a 2-storey element with a linking section and a single-storey element, which is the 2-storey element, the single-storey element, and the linking section. And that's with the 2 gable ends of a section through Branksea Close, showing what you will see if you were stood in that public open space, and some photographs of the site. So the existing access to Branksea Close, the existing boundary fence, which leads into a hedge, the view back to the site from Branksea Close, back to Menevor, from within the site back to Menevor, and back towards Rams Valley through the site. Any questions?
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to discuss the issue of local housing. Obviously, this has been made reference to by several letters of representation. The disappointment of not seeing an application for local housing. The applicant does make reference in the design and access statement to previous engagement with locals about local housing, and stated that in a meeting it was thought of by locals as inappropriate to have local housing there. Now, my question would be, where's the evidence for that? And as a council, shouldn't we actually be more supportive of applications for local housing than for holiday lets?
Well, I don't have any evidence of the public meeting. He held that as a private landowner and spoke to the neighbours about this planning application. At a pre-application stage, officers were very much of the view that this should be a scheme. It would be, as a brownfield site, it would be more in a sustainable location. It would be better if it was affordable housing to meet local needs and not as a holiday let scheme. The applicant has obviously considered it, spoke to the neighbouring properties, presented a case of a denser, to make it stack up financially, a denser scheme for delivering affordable dwellings on the plot, or this less impactful, in his view, holiday let development, which does provide disability friendly, very bespoke disability friendly holiday let accommodation, which he, through his own investigations, considers is a gap in the market on the Isles of Scilly.
Okay, thank you. It's just my confusion really that, yeah, he apparently had this meeting with local people who said, we don't want local housing. Then a lot of the responses from local people said, we do want local housing. So there seems to be a disconnect there.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not against development on the site per se, but going back to the comments of Councillor Smith, it seems like a huge lost opportunity for having no local housing on the site. Even if it was a blend, which was a combination of what we have and what we could potentially have, but it just, as I said, seems like a lost opportunity when we've been talking so hard about some of the options that we would like to pursue. I'm very mindful of the objections which have been included in the letters which have been submitted. And I think whatever the outcome today, the issues of raw sewage and those sorts of blockages are very undesirable and need some urgent attention. I fully understand the recommendation and the sort of need for material planning issues for any rejection against that. But I'm going to be voting with my heart rather than head on this one, I think. And I won't be supporting today's application for the issues around local housing.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd like to first thank Lisa for arranging the site visit. It's really good to see the place in context and the surrounding areas. I'd also like to thank the members of the public that took the time to raise their concerns and write into the council. It's really good to get some local input into the issue. I guess there's ways and means of presenting a local affordable case. If it stacks up, there's certain monies that need to be made and certain densities that can be put into an area. And if those are overly dense, then yes, people will reject them, I guess. So what I'm saying is, the applicant must have certain ideas of profit he needs to make the scheme viable, and this is the only way he can make that viable according to his his limits. I think members have got to be careful about, if they do reject the scheme, there needs to be a material planning issue with the scheme, and I suppose the Deputy Monitoring Officer can help with that. So if we do reject it, then the applicant can appeal with this. And if we don't have a material planning issue with it, then that appeal will be won straight away. So we have to be wary of that. I can't, as much as I don't like the plan, I can't see myself, given the responses from the infrastructure team about sewage, that they see there is no issue with the sewage system there, that we can refuse it on that grounds. Car parking seemed to be an issue. I don't know whether we can that was a consistent issue from representations. Is there a way we can condition anything to do with car parking, or car parking in the winter months when it's used for workers? Because that seems to be the issue, rather than in the summer. So
there is no car parking proposed as part of the scheme, and I don't think it would be reasonable to impose any off-street car parking, given that these are holiday lets.
But in the winter, they're not holiday lets. So can we impose a condition that says there's no car park, no cars to be used at that building?
I don't personally think that would be a reasonable condition, given that it's a public highway, there are no car parking restrictions. It's outside the remit of the red line site boundary. I don't know if Craig wants to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, Chairman, just a couple of things actually, and to come back to some of the points already being made. This application is very clear. It is actually for holiday use, and as a local planning authority, we're here to consider the merits or otherwise of the application as presented to us. That's the first thing I would say. Councillor Dan Marcus is absolutely right. If members are mindful to refuse this application, they need to have material planning reasons as to why this application should be refused, because it's not just the appeal situation in case we lose, but obviously if we're making unreasonable decisions, or if members are making unreasonable decisions, then costs can be awarded against the council. And then in the point that's been made about the car parking, I would remind members that the recommendation on condition 12 is actually to condition the dwellings so that they're only used for the provision of short-let holiday accommodation. Okay, so even during the winter time, that condition would still apply. So my view is that it would be inappropriate to provide any off-street car parking for this particular proposal, given the fact that visitors coming to the islands do not bring their car.
So that would be counted against the representations we had from the public saying that workers were using the holiday let during the winter and there was excessive parking during the winter. So is there a way we can do something with that, or?
Chairman, there is a mechanism in condition 12 in that the owner or operator should maintain a register of occupants for each calendar year. So that's something that we can monitor. In terms of the condition is very clear. It says it should not be used as a permanent dwelling, but it can be occupied by any person for a period not exceeding 28 days in any calendar year. So there might be some scope, some flexibility for seasonal workers if they're only here and they're very transient to use that as part of that particular condition. But the point is, it's very much very temporary accommodation. So we're not talking about a kind of winter let here where somebody can occupy the property during the complete winter months.
Thank you. Councillor Watt?
Thank you, Chairman. I've looked through the planning application in detail.
Steve, you're light.
Sorry, I'll say it again. I've looked through the planning application in detail and did not come here with any idea of predetermination, but I've got three major concerns. It's not very ultimately clear about the impact on drinking water supply and sewage, and it's also raised by the council's infrastructure department to saying that that the sewage discharge at the moment is a maximum capacity. I know I heard Councillor Marcus mention that it's actually been accommodated within the planning application. The second issue I've got is a loss of trees and wildlife habitat, and there's no mention of bats in the report. Now, three of the letters of objection, which I've read again, I've read each of them twice, in fact. Three of them mention the fact that bats actually use that area. Is it because there is no building that bats use? Why there's no bat survey done?
Yes, there's no demolition of structures. I mean, bats are known to use trees and things like that. So the legal requirement to be mindful and comply with the law in respect to protected species will still apply if this development goes ahead. But we cannot require a bat survey because they're not demolishing buildings or altering the roofs of buildings, which is the trigger point for us to request a bat survey.
Okay, and the third point, Chairman, is something which is a very small item in the report on, I think it's paragraph 14. Cornwall Fire and Rescue mentioned the fact of access in case there's a fire there, and mentioned that they may not get a completion certificate under building regulations, and therefore the lives of occupants would be at risk. And I wonder again why that wasn't made more clear in the application or preamble to the application.
Because we're not under this is considering the application under the Town and Country Planning Act, not under the building regulations. So if planning permission is granted, they still have to develop a scheme that complies with the building regulations. And if they can't get that, they need to amend the plans to a scheme that can deliver that, which would then mean coming back to planning.
I think if I can come back on that point, if you look at the representation on the website, it says that the fire appliance has to be within 45 metres of the buildings, which is how, for instance, Branksea Close, the rest of Branksea Close is closer than the far end of Branksea Close. So, and my point you mentioned about the sewage is just replicating what what Lisa has got from Eddie Williams as well, saying that they are under the impression, they think that they are saying that the system is not at capacity.
Councillor Sims.
Regarding that last point, we've been told by infrastructure that there's not a stress point down there, so we can't really second guess that and argue about that. The access, I mean, when I first saw this, I'm very, very familiar with that area, and I agree parking is fairly tight on that bit of Church Road, but it's not terminally bad, really. But one thought I did have was possibly make a condition to cut a little bit off the edge so that there's actually a little bit more room to get down there. But then again, if the hoses can get down, it's fine. But the main point I really wanted to make was if there were options in this, i.e. a clump of local housing or holiday lets, then we'd all jump at the local housing, but that's not there. So we can't do it. So we basically got to run with what we've got, and we have to find material planning reasons to reject it. And I personally cannot see any, whatever my personal opinions of the development are. And one other question, it says there won't be any access from Rams Valley. Well, clearly looking at the map, it's just a matter of making a hole in the hedge if they want to later on. I mean, it would strike me, if you are building there, it would be a great deal of utility being able to have access from Rams Valley. Is that a condition?
I understand that Rams Valley is a private road, and there's also separate ownership issues to establish a right-of-way up to the back of this site. I think the applicant is aware of that and is not intending to put any access through to Rams Valley. But they've put an access in from Church Road through Branksea Close.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, I'm not convinced that the overlooking into Branksea Close, is that what overlooks into Branksea Close, the east elevation? There are windows at the top that are going to look right into. Now, I've lived up in Branksea Close, and you can actually, you would be able to see, I think, to what's going on there. And also the house, I think it's number 4, I think would be overlooked, and number 8 probably. I don't like it either, but that's what
just coming back to
I just think it would be overlooked, and it's sort of saying here that it isn't.
Just coming back to that, Chair, the 4 windows at first floor, the 2 central ones are obscurely glazed ensuite bathroom windows, so you wouldn't get any overlooking. The 2 either side are bedroom windows, so yes, they will not be obscurely glazed. The distances, I mean, they're quite oblique. Some of the you wouldn't get a look into those properties from that angle. So the distances going across, if you measure from the centre point, are between 8 and 12 metres, which I think is a similar distance to what they faced the face-to-face relationship that the properties have at the moment. And these are at an oblique angle. But I do take your point. There is a perception of overlooking, even if you're not being directly overlooked.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to pick up on that issue of overlooking, which many respondents have picked up on as well, especially those living in Branksea Close. Having been down to the area last week, I can quite see their concerns. Likewise, I think many of the respondents also picked up on the wildlife value and amenity value of that garden area, which is actually very valuable in that part of St Mary's, and I fully support what they say. So in fact, I'm going to propose refusal on the basis of overlooking onto Branksea Close, which is against the principles in the design guide and has serious issues for those living there locally. Also in terms of access, which I do not think is adequate for the proposals there, which as they say is up to 12 bed spaces. And also on the loss of the green space, which goes against the principles in our new local plan policy OE2, a loss of biodiversity, which in the application they've not made any provision for in terms of compensation. And I believe that actually there is virtually no landscaping plans in here, which is a detriment to the application. And therefore I'm going to propose refusal on those principles.
Councillor Marcus.
Just to remind Councillor Smith that OE2 and the new local plan isn't the plan that we are subscribing to. There is some limited weight we can put on it, but it's not, as I understand it, a material planning concern that we can use for a refusal.
Indeed, but if I would say that I think as full council we fully endorse the principles of the local plan and we understand that they will be enforced in the near future.
Chairman, just for clarification, the new local plan is a material consideration, but obviously the significance is on the basis of where it actually is within the system. So obviously once it's adopted, it will be the development plan for the area, but it has been already through one iteration of public consultation and has been reapproved by members for further consultation. So it is a material consideration, but clearly doesn't carry as much weight as an adopted local plan.
Councillor Sims.
In terms of, well, it's like a wild little area now there, and obviously that has utility for wildlife. But I think we do have to bear in mind, within 150 yards, there are dozens and dozens of elm trees. I mean, it is, for Hewtown, it's a very well forested area.
Thank you. Well, we have a proposer for refusal of this application. Do we have a seconder for that proposal, please? Councillor Mumford. Thank you. All those in favour of refusal?
For the reasons given.
Sorry?
For the reasons given, Chairman.
For the reasons given.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against refusal.
Those against refusal?
1, 2, 3.
Thank you. The refusal is carried. Thank you. Item 10 on the agenda is the corporate plan report of the Senior Manager, Infrastructure and Planning. Thank you, Craig.
Yes, Chairman, as members will be fully aware, an awful lot of work has gone into developing the corporate plan, both by members working closely with officers. Obviously, this is a very important strategic document because it does actually establish the agreed vision and priorities for the council. So an incredibly important piece of work. And also as well, I think very timely, because obviously we are talking about the budget today. And I think one of the issues, and certainly one of the rationale behind a corporate plan, is that it actually steers and aligns the medium-term financial plan. So you'll see the recommendation is to approve the corporate plan. There's also a second recommendation as well, because obviously the corporate plan, as before you, is slightly incomplete. The majority of the work is done. The important work is done because obviously you've got the objectives, priorities, the vision, but obviously there does need to be a little bit more work in terms of the overall design. And also, obviously we do also need a forward from the chairman as well.
Thank you. Before we take any questions on the corporate plan, I would just like to thank Councillor Dan Marcus very much for his efforts with the corporate plan. He's led on this and helped and guided us through all this Thank you, Dan, very much indeed for all your efforts. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. You've taken the words out of my mouth. I was going to start with a compliment towards Dan, but I will say that the 4 visions, values and behaviours on the page 45 of your pack, good that they are good in that they're pretty straightforward and standard. But I think they might be better if they were less corporate and a bit more aligned to the islands rather than values in general.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
I'll firstly thank you everyone who has been involved in this. It's been a great pleasure, and especially thanks to Gemma Pender as well, who's helped bring it all together and keep it all together. In terms of vision values, yes, I think we need to do more work on that, but I think it was important to get something here today now. And by implication, we will be bringing this document back next year as well, because we have the 1920 priorities in here. We're going to need to update those for the 2021's priorities for next year. So yeah, something that all members can agree on in terms of values would be a good thing for next year.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I echo the comments about welcoming the report we got before us. What I wasn't quite sure about is the whole aspect of performance management. How often are updates going to be brought to full council for us to comment on, so reviews can be factored in and those sorts of aspects taken into consideration?
Well, we worked on a performance tracker, so all the outcomes will sit on a spreadsheet and will come every quarter to support Russell's budget monitoring papers. So what we'll do is then RAG rate them, and then it's up to members to decide, because I don't think you'll want to go through every single one. Are you going to look at all the reds, all the greens, or some of each from each service? But at least you'll see how we're performing against each of those outcomes. There'll be a piece of work that officers need to do initially, which is to get all the baseline data in, and then we can get going. And then obviously all this will evolve over time. You know, we might say, actually, we don't want to do it that way, but it's a suggestion. And Dan has actually developed the spreadsheet himself. So it's really useful.
Thank you.
I'll send it round after the meeting, actually.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Perhaps could someone please help me, perhaps Craig with it, or Ashley with a bit of information. If we decide that we want to refine or augment these values, when would be an opportune moment to do that? I mean, you suggest that Joel's just mentioned we regularly review this, which I think is a great idea, and it comes as part of the budget monitoring. Would that give us the facility to amend or augment these at that moment?
It's totally within our power. We're the members, we're the owners of this plan. We can do what we want with it. So it's not up to these guys, it's up to us. They don't need to have any.
You understand that? I thought we could be guided on the process.
Well, no, I don't think. I think we do the process as well. It's all up to us. This is our plan. We have to take control of it and be powerful with it. So there you go. So
good
in
advice,
that terms,
thank you. So we have recommendations. One, that members approve the corporate plan for 2019 to 2022, and that a forward from the chairman be added to the corporate plan by the interim chief executive in consultation with the chairman, vice chairman, and Councillor Dan Marcus. So I intend to take the two recommendations together. Could we have a proposer, please? Councillor Mumford. Councillor Sims.
I just wanted to make a small comment, though. I'm pretty well okay with it. I just think final version needs to be use less paper, really, and less pictures, really. I think we could probably do one that looks lovely and a more condensed one.
Thank you.
There's a plan to get some design input into this so that it's particularly friendly for the public.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. So we come to item 11 on the budget, on the agenda, which is our all-important council budget 2019 to 2020, and our council tax setting 2019-2020, and the medium-term financial plan 2019 to 2022. And I'll hand over to Russell Ashman, our 151 officer. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, this report sets out the council's financial plans for the next 3 years, including setting the budget for 2019-20, the capital programme that supports the council's corporate plan that we just approved in the last item. It identifies what the level of council tax is required to support these financial plans going forward, and it also identifies the level of reserves we've got, what those reserves will look like over the 3-year period, and it also includes my statutory commentary on the robustness and sustainability of the council's financial plan, including its level of reserves. It is quite a long report. I'll take questions at the end, but I'll try and do a quick run through rather than do it page by page. But obviously, as members are aware, that council's had difficulties with its financial planning and its financial affairs over the last 2 or 3 years, which resulted in there being a structural deficit. And obviously, the external auditors issued their Section 24 notice. Going forward, over the last couple of years, over £800,000 worth of savings have been identified, and in the majority of cases, they've been delivered. Therefore, a significant element of that structural deficit has been already addressed, but there is still a small element outstanding going forward. At the same time, we've addressed the weaknesses in the financial control systems, etc., that are around, and replaced the financial systems platform. Although there is a small element of the structural deficit still to be addressed, obviously that isn't the only issue going forward. We will have new budget pressures. Those are identified in the paper. And there's about 396,000 of new pressures in addition to the last bit of the structural deficit to be addressed. So in total, we need about £480,000 worth of savings to balance the budget going forward. The paper sets out the budget and the medium-term financial plan going forward and tries to link that to the previous item, the corporate plan. So you've got those 4 pillars that we talked about just now in the corporate plan. The idea is that this budget helps support those and how it actually helps deliver that plan over the period. So that's in summary. In terms of the report, in the detail, it goes through starting point for when we set the budget and the medium-term financial plan is what resources have we available. And on page 64, we start off the story of resources, total resources available to the authority in setting the net budget, our council tax, business rates and government grants. And in table 1, it sets out what our resources look like over the next 3 years of our medium-term financial plan. We've made assumptions on council tax going forward that we will go to the cap, and we've assumed the cap will stay at 3%. So we are expecting a 2.99% increase for the 3 years. We're assuming that the business rates may be a very small growth in business rates going forward, something akin to what we've seen in the last year. And we're assuming that the revenue support grant will stay pretty static. The councils are silly in terms of the revenue support grant been reasonably well protected over the last 2 or 3 years. If you compare us with neighbouring authorities, not in the southwest, but also nationally, where local authorities have seen significant reductions in the RSG, the main government grant, we've been pretty much maintained at a similar level. Okay, that isn't the end all of everything, because obviously costs are going up by inflation, but it's a better position than some local authorities. Some local authorities now have no government support at all, and some went negative, and they had to rush in a piece of legislation to deal with the fact that they went negative, which is a bit ironic when you think you're getting a government grant, but actually you pay it the other way. So they had to address that. We're not in that position, thankfully. So total resources are set out there at 4.989 million for 2019-20, and it rises to 5.163 million by 21-22. As I say, that is an estimate for 21-22, so that we can have some control totals for spending in our medium-term financial plan. Without going through the detail, there's a table on page 65 that sets out how the business rates figure is arrived at. It's a mixture of the 50% business rates that we're allowed to retain, the other 50% being sent to central government, but it also includes a series of top-up grants and Section 31 grants from central government to reflect the reliefs and the redistribution of business rates nationally. Moving on, council tax. The council tax base is set out there at the bottom of page 65. This is a key table in terms of us setting the council tax for next year. We assume that the collectible base for 2019-20 be 1,317. This is a slight reduction compared with 2018-19, and I will say that compared with most local authorities, this is a little bit against what normally happens, because there's usually a growth in the council tax base as people have new properties built, but obviously on city is so negligible you don't actually see new properties being built. That is a disbenefit, because it doesn't actually see the base go up in terms of the number of properties that you can get council tax on. Most of the local authorities expect at least a 1% per annum, if not greater, increase in their base. That is obviously quite a valuable source of additional resources, which we unfortunately cannot get. Probably an important table for members is halfway down page 66 is the council tax requirement, and is how we arrive at the level of council tax that we will vote on later. The council tax requirement takes the total resources that we require to run the council from a revenue budget perspective, takes off the other sources of funding that we have, business rates and the revenue support grant. That comes down to what is left, i.e. the council tax requirement. Obviously you divide that by the collectible tax base to get the Band D council tax equivalent. And as I say, that is 2.99% increase on the previous year, and that's what we've assumed going forward for the next 3 years. Government grants I've already touched on. You can see in the tables there, and I won't touch on them anymore, that we've been reasonably well protected compared with the rest of the country. But obviously we don't want to rest on our laurels, and we do want to sort out a better position going forward with central government, and that is the work that the Chair has been doing with the ministerial visits last week. Other than the core grants that come from central government to support us, which are the general grants, so they're not specific in any way of what we spend them on, there are other sources of funding that support our overall net budget, and the page is 67 and 68, and again I won't allude to the individual details, set out those in detail with our key government grants, which form part of the income to the services, because they're treated as income direct to services, are set out there. You'll see that there's a significant reduction between 2018-19 and 19-20 in the total. And you'll see that is all down to the Isles of Scilly Education Grant, which is a reflection of the fact of the school going to academy status and the funding going direct. So it isn't a loss of funding per se, because both the cost and the income have now been moved out of the local authority budget. The rest of the grants are staying reasonable within the comparison from year to year, but I think I will point out that, as with the council tax base, you can see from the new homes bonus, we don't get very much of the national picture in terms of £700. Quite surprised the government even allocated such a small sum, to be honest. That gives us our total resources. So our total resources are unspecified resources, council tax, business rates, and the RSG grant. Then we have our income derived from fees and charges, and our specific government grants to services. That gives us our total resource package. Therefore, we then need to look at what we expend that money on. In the next section, that sets that out. It sets out the savings, as I alluded to earlier, that we've delivered over the last 3 years. It also sets out in more detail the budget pressures and the growth that we're facing over the next 3 years. As with most plans, it's far more granular for the immediate budget year, 2019-20, although there are pressures there going over the 3-year medium-term financial plan period. You can see that in total for at least 2019-20, we've got total pressures of another 396,000. So it gives you a feeling that on an annual basis, the level of budget pressures that the authority does face. So even having static funding from central government doesn't go towards meeting the rising costs and the rising budget pressures that we face on an annual basis. As I set out earlier, that if you bring the structural deficit remainder of 109,000 into that 396 and then take off the slight increase in funding of 22,000, you come to requirements to find savings to balance the budget for 2019-20 of £483,607. For 2021, just shy of £60,000. And for 21-22, we need to find £58,000 of savings. So then you go table 3.8, that is how senior managers working alongside myself have come up with a series of savings and measures. And I say measures because some of the savings are how we better use our reserves going forward. We don't want to become reliant on drawing from the general fund reserve, but on the other side, there is a question mark of whether we should be putting further money away into some of the specific reserves at the moment, to the detriment of having to reduce services. So in that table, it sets out how we try and address that 484,000 in 2019-20 and the savings in the MTFP for the following 2 years. As with what we did in the current financial year, we've then plugged those savings into the savings risk analysis model that we developed last summer. Currently, due to the nature of some of these savings, that they are accounting treatments of reserves, and that some of these savings are already in place as mitigations against the non-delivery of some of the savings from the current year, you'll see that all the savings are actually deemed to be low risk at the moment. The reason that the low risk is that they're either in place or those plans are well established to deliver these already. Now, obviously, we'll maintain this monitoring as we did for the current year, and we'll see whether they all stay green for the year. If they don't, we'll obviously have to find mitigations. But at the moment, going through the piece of work, they're all scoring around about the 10 factor on our model. And we're quite confident that we will be able to deliver most of those savings. In essence, when we get onto the risk table in a minute further on, we do allow for some under-delivery in the level of reserves we're holding. For the first time in the budget, in the next section, the bottom of page 71, we've tried to identify some of the specific revenue projects that are also within the revenue budget. Because most of these projects usually come back to a net budget of zero, they don't usually, or haven't previously been shown transparently in the budget. Table 12 tries to set and correct that so that members can be aware of some of the revenue budget projects that are ongoing and how they're being funded. As you can see, you're aware of all of those initiatives, and further down that page it sits those initiatives in against those 4 pillars of the corporate plan and how they're trying to deliver some of those aspirations in the corporate plan. So most of those, I say, should be recognisable as they've all been through full council for approval in previous meetings. So in summary, set out at the top of page 73, you have a budget proposal that shows a 3-year medium-term financial plan with a detailed 2019-20 budget, which shows how it's going to be balanced, a balanced position over those 3 years with an assumption on the resources available. You will notice that there is no general fund reserve drawdown. So we're doing this now without drawing down from the general fund. So we're technically out of a structural deficit position, and you'll see that the actual specific reserves are actually a contribution to reserves because it's a positive figure. So it's a budget that is actually putting a small amount away into specific reserves rather than drawing from reserves going forward. Moving on, as part of the budget process, we've done a review of the council's reserves, which are on the next 2 or 3 pages, and there are a number of reserves that we were sat on which were deemed to be specific reserves, but had no real commitments against those. So as part of the reserve review, we've moved those to the general fund because unless they've got a very specific commitment, they should be held as a general reserve, not a specific reserve. We've also reviewed a number of what are deemed to be the grant reserves, and there's a set of accounting rules set out by government that if we don't spend the grants that we get for specific purposes, we need to put them in reserve, and depends on whether they have conditions or no conditions, then depends on how we can treat them going forward. We've done a review of those reserves or elements that we're holding on the balance sheet, and we anticipate that we'll move a significant part of those grant reserves also to the general fund reserve, because for the instances they were awarded for, we've probably delivered one way or the other over the years. We just have never drawn down the reserve from the balance sheet. The ones that are left on there are generally the ones that come with conditions, and if we haven't satisfied the conditions, they should stay on the reserve, and that is what we've done. I alluded to earlier that in setting the level of general fund reserve, which will be set at just under 2 million for 2018-19 feeding into 2019-20, that we have a look and see what level of general fund reserve we should hold. This is now done on a risk-based approach rather than as a percentage of the net budget. Table at the top of page 76 sets out an analysis of the potential risks that we think sit against this budget. You'll see that they total just a little bit less than £1.1 million. Therefore, we have a general fund reserve well in excess of that. So the likelihood of all those risks occurring in 1 year is probably highly unlikely, but even so, we have them comfortably covered off within the financial plan that we're proposing today. Moving on, the capital strategy, a new part of the annual budget process that government has set through the new SIPFA Prudential Code in 2017 was that we needed to have a capital strategy as part of the medium-term financial plan in the budget. A lot of this is aimed at authorities who have been rather aggressive in what they call the commercial sector, but it still means that all the local authorities should have a better linkage of their capital programme to what is its capital strategy. And we try and set that out over the next couple of pages on 76 and 77 and link it to, again, the council corporate plan. On the top of page 78, you'll see that we've allocated the individual schemes against each of the 4 areas of the corporate plan. Some of the schemes may appear in more than one box because they may be addressing more than one of the key areas of the corporate plan. Again, it's a starting point. We've never tried to link the capital programme with the corporate plan before, and we'll refine this as we go during the year. But it's a starting point that we've now linked our capital programme to our corporate plan. The capital programme itself is set out on page 79. You'll recognise the total approved programme of just under 4 million, 3.921 million, which we approved in December. There's an extra 2.9 million now for approval over the next 3 years. The funding of that is set out below, and any revenue implications of that are already being built into the revenue budget over the 3 years. So it's fully funded going forward, that capital programme within the whole financial plan. What it doesn't include, which is important for members, I think is at the bottom of page 79. I'm not going to read them out, but there's 5 items there which are in progress in terms of either business cases or feasibility reports. As and when those business cases and feasibility reports are done, There'll be further reports back working out what the financial implications of those programmes are, both revenue and capital. At that point, there'll be approval through full council to either add them or not add them to the capital programme. But they're not inclusive of the capital programme that is here for approval today. We then move forward on page 80 to the council tax statutory recommendations. They're detailed in Appendix 1 for you, set out in the terminology that is required that we need to by law. But basically, we have to set the council tax for not only the Council of the Isles of Scilly, but also the Devon and Cornwall Police and Crime Commissioner. Table 18 in the middle of the table sets out the proposal, which we've already been through for the Council of the Isles of Scilly, how we've arrived at through the council tax requirements, that requirement of a council tax of £1,277 for a Band D property. You can see also that the police figures are set out there, and you may or may not be aware, the police had a special dispensation to increase council tax this year, which they have taken the opportunity to maximise that to the £24 per annum, which is what the Devon and Cornwall Police have done. Therefore, you can see what the impact of that is on the council tax for Band D in that table, where it is now up to £1,489.34p, a 4.28% increase on previous year, and 12.75 increase on the police precept. My commentary sets out from the bottom of that page, setting out the robustness of the budget. I think there are a number of risks and issues in this. We are on a journey. The financial resilience isn't fully in place yet, so we have to bear that in mind. We are moving towards becoming in a balanced position, but there are still risks around that. We haven't embedded all the financial controls in the organisation yet, and I think you remember in the December meeting, that was the opinion of the external auditor. Although good progress is made, the issue of embedding those is still not here, so we need to bear that in mind. The systems are slowly becoming the norm, but they're not there yet. There are other issues around. Obviously, there's issues around Brexit and what's going to impact on Brexit. There's the challenge of the airport and the uniqueness of the airport from the council's perspective, is that it's a critical part of the island infrastructure. There's obviously risks around running an airport. I've alluded to those in the report. We've got the inter-island transport issues, which is also always a unique issue to the Isles of Scilly, but obviously comes with it with a financial risk. We had the risk this year brought out through having, a very nice summer in 2018, but that brought with it the risk of the pressure it put on the water system. Although the transfer of the water service to South West Water is going well, it won't address the current financial year. So if we have another similar summer, we may have similar financial problems. We've got some issues that we're going to have to address around the condition of our council houses, etc. So I've set out where I think the risks are. I think that in most cases, we have a level of reserve now through the reserve review of reserves that we've done, that we can cope with any of those instances in the current year. So we have a budget that balances, and we have a level of reserves that can give it some sustainability and some shock against risk. I think that's my report. I wanted to take questions following that. Set out in the appendices are the actual council tax resolutions, and in Appendix B, the service budgets, and the capital strategy is set out in more detail in Appendix 3.
Thank you very much, Russell, for an excellent and comprehensive report. I think we're going to give Henry the chance a minute to depart so that he doesn't miss his lunch. So once again, Henry, thank you very much indeed. And I hope you found our council meeting of some interest and not too boring. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to thank the Section 15 officer for a good report in two senses. I mean, I think it brings a lot of good news, and I think we're, as you say, we're on a financial journey, but a very positive one. And I'd like to thank you for the quality of the report. You know, they really are getting better, and I think particularly the commentary at the end is very helpful, really, to give an overview of, you know, where you think we are. Just a couple of specific question, well, sorry, a point really on council tax. I think you're absolutely right to bring up the point about the police precept, and I think this is an area we as a council probably have to work on. This is a, you know, I think I'm very encouraged that we as a council are only putting up by 3% a year now. I think that's really good for local people, but the police amount is going up by an awful lot. I just want to ask you regarding your comments in 10.4, on page 81 of essentially around a change of culture in finance in the organisation, and whether you felt it was sort of going well or it was taking a bit longer than hoped for, just to get a feeling on how we as an organisation are reacting to those financial changes.
I think it is going well. I've said that in the report, and I've said it in previous reports to full council over the last 6 or 7 months. It is going well, but I think it's a risk I put is complacency. Have we embedded it all the way through the authority? I don't think so. I think that, you know, that isn't there yet. The culture doesn't change overnight. It takes time. I think we're slowly getting there. We're moving in the right direction, but it's the level of complacency. The feeling is that we've had a tough time over the last 2 or 3 years. We've had to make some real savings. We've had to have a pretty aggressive approach to spending. And although we're moving in the right direction, we still need to have that strong financial control, that strong approach to spending going forward. And it isn't a matter of let's return to the period of 3 or 4 years ago, just because we're beginning to get rid of the structural deficit.
Sure, and just so, is there anything more that we, you know, as a council could and should be doing to encourage that change quicker, or do you think it's sort of going largely on track, as well as it could be expected, if you like?
I think it's going as expected. It takes time to embed it into people's daily, to change people. The change process is underestimated. Whether whatever change you're putting in place, it takes a long time for people to. The initial push of change, people quickly grasp, but then to make it part of a normal daily process takes more time. That they rather than have to think about it, it becomes second nature. That takes more time, and that's where you need to get to have that solid financial control environment that both the external and the internal auditors are looking for.
Yeah, thank you. And just one specific question on 10.11 on page 82, referring to smart islands. As you rightly say, there's some large and complex projects there. I was just trying to pick out from that whether you felt sort of how concerned you were about the risk, and a suggestion that maybe that risk has increased, or would you not say so?
I don't think the risk has increased from what I've said previously in the, I think it was December meeting that approved the project. I'm just saying that as a 3 million plus project, the risk, you know, it is a very large project. A relatively small financial implication of a project of 3 million would have a significant impact on the council's budget. There's no further risk than what's previously been flagged, but I don't think we could set a budget with a commentary to say that we haven't. You know, it's nice to have that project, but it does come with a risk that if just a simple 1 or 2% overspending that project comes with quite a large sum of money.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to sort of carry on from Councillor Smith's theme when we were talking about the sort of culture. I was looking at some outturn figures last night, and looking at anticipated figures, it seemed about 33% of budget lines were on or very close to budget. About 33% were significantly over, and about 33% were significantly under. So I was just wondering if that's something which we can, is that normal in your experience to have that sort of variation? Fortunately, we ended up with we're looking like we're going to have a small underspend. But not, as I said, about 33% of the budgets were on track, but majority weren't.
I think when you look at the details and you get down to the granular level, there is a lot of variation within budgets, because what happens is that individual services have financial pressures they have to deal with, stuff that isn't planned has to be dealt with, and that quite often gets dealt with by a senior manager, offsetting that with an availability of delivering a saving in another budget to help offset it. So when you get down to the more granular level, you do see the variations. What I would say is probably not the volume, it would be an issue, because that's what I'd normally expect. I would not expect people to be coming in right on the nose on the budget. I'd be suspicious of that. But what it is probably be the size of some of those at the moment, which is, and it's also a reflection of some of the size of the budgets. But a relatively small issue can look quite disproportionate against some of the budgets. But it is still early days, and I think it reflects that the level of detail in some of the granular detail in the budgets is still being worked up. Some of the budgets have been set on the basis of historic information, and what we find is, as we're moving forward, we're getting a sort of a bit of a double whammy in the way that we're getting better quality actual information, but some of the budgets are based on less accurate historic information. So this is why it takes time and it doesn't happen overnight, because they say, you look back, in one way, how do you set a budget? You look back on what you spent last year, but then when you find out that some of the coding accuracies of what was in the 16, 17, 17, 18 accounts was a little bit dubious, it's going to take a couple of years for that to wash out. Things don't happen overnight, because it goes forward a year and it takes another year to sort out, etc. So it's all part of the journey. It's the size of some of the variations that are probably more of concerning rather than the volume.
And can I just also ask about the sort of mechanics of collection of council tax? Last year it was obviously a different system, and there was quite a bit of frustration with some people as the payments seemed to go askew. Are you anticipating that now we're more embedded in that, but fewer people will be disrupted?
Yeah, that is the plan. Our actual performance figures that I think I put in the third quarter financial report were pretty good. I've seen the figures at the end of February where our performance in terms of collection is even better. We're looking really good on that. We had some issues in the first couple of months of collection of the switch over to the new system. Hopefully we will learn from those and we can address those. And we've addressed those, and hopefully we're in a better position to understand some of those issues and prevent them happening again.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted some clarification about Table 17 and Resolution 7. I think we discussed this earlier. It's just by approving this capital programme, we are still able to amend the programme at a later date.
Members are able to amend the capital programme at any full council meeting. We will bring the capital programme as part of the quarterly financial report. So you'll see performance against it as part of the quarterly reporting process that we bring in. But not only will that give you an opportunity to see it in detail and make any amendments you so wish, at any meeting members can ask for an amendment to the capital programme.
Councillor Grottick.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Russell and all the officers for the immense amount of work that's gone into this very clear report. I'd like to say that while we all find it reassuring, we also do obviously agree with you, Russell, that we can't be complacent. I've got one little concern, or not so little concern, perhaps you can reassure me. You've said that there has been quite a lot of regularisation of the reserves, and you've managed to really increase the level of the general fund reserve, because there were some dormant reserves or reserves that we hadn't, used, and we could do that. But obviously we can only do this once or twice or possibly 3 times. We now must have come to the end of the road. And as I mentioned on Saturday, it seems to me that now not only have you looked behind the sofa cushions, but you've probably dismantled the sofa. So it just concerns me that if you like, we've lost a little bit of wriggle room and comfort. And I'd just appreciate your comment on that, please.
Yeah, I think it's probably the second time it's been done. I think the previous Section 151 officer, Andy Brown, did a review in the previous year. I think we've done a far more in-depth review this time. It should be the last time we do a major review, but reserves should always be kept under review as a part of a good financial management regime. Yes, the general fund reserve is at a better level going forward at nearly 1.9 million, but the ability to top that up again from these other reserves, the dormant reserves, is unlikely that that will happen again. But if you can see over the 3-year MTFP span of time that we've got, we expect that general fund reserve to stay at that level. Obviously, if we have to draw down that because one of the risks comes to fruition, then as part of a future budget setting process, we'll have to make a decision on whether we let that reserve drop from 1.8 or whether we replenish it somehow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Sims.
I just wanted to points of clarification. I don't want people to think that perhaps we're being unintentionally disingenuous. I mean, Jonathan said we've only put council tax up by 2.99%. Well, in fact, we've actually maxed it. That's the most we can put it up. And also, I think Fran alluded earlier on, she said lots of councils in the country have put up theirs by 4.5%, but that's because they didn't max out the social care preset to the previous 2 years. So actually, we've not really been generous at all. We've actually maxed it out, and we get we sort of do this sort of like story that our band D council tax is a lot less than it is in lots of other places, and that's true. However, we have got hardly any ABCs, so our band D is effectively our band A. So I think there's a slight misnomer that we have one of the lowest council taxes in the country. I don't think that's the case. Regarding the police, 12.75%, which is quite a lot. Well, that's not really their fault. It's basically, it comes down to they've been squeezed over the last 10 years relentlessly by central government. It's the only place they can get it from. And it enables central government to blame the police for doing it as opposed to their underfund. So I just want to make that little political point there, really. I thought that was essentially the point I wanted to make, that we have actually maxed out our council tax because we have to. There's no choice.
Thank you. Councillor Watt. Oh, sorry, Russell, please.
I think that on that, one of the reasons the council maxes out on its council tax is the same reason, is that, you know, the level of funding, although we haven't been as poorly hit as other local authorities, the level of government funding has still reduced over the 3 or 4 years. Therefore, the only other place left for the council is council tax as well.
No, I wasn't. I completely accept that. We have no choice. Otherwise, we would have no services and no council.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to echo the compliments on the quality of this report. In particular, I'd like to draw attention to the phrase in 1.5. The council is very close to living within its resource envelope. I think it's something my wife's been trying to get me to do for years.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Sorry, just one quick question following on from what Councillor Sims is saying. We've just heard the chairman articulate that he's been to some meetings in London. We're actually asking for a fair funding settlement. We have to also send a message that we have to do what we can ourselves, however regrettable it is that we have this maxed out, as you call it, increase. It sends a message to central government, I think, that we're doing what we can, but we still need help.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
I wasn't implying that as a criticism of the authority in any way, shape or form. I think it's something we absolutely have to do. And I hope the public will understand it, though they won't like it. We all have to pay it as well.
Thank you. So we have 10 recommendations, members, and I'm sure you don't want me to read them all out. Everyone's got them in front of you. But I should point out that you all do need to vote, please, because obviously we're talking about a statutory requirement here, and in standing orders, we have to all vote. Yes.
Can I just clarify that, Chair? If people don't want to vote, then we have to record their names.
Yeah, well, that's
So
what
if
I was
everybody
meaning,
votes,
yes.
Then it's easier for the minutes.
Yeah, but I need to ask you whether you're happy with all 10 recommendations for me to take them all together. Please, is anybody not happy with that? Okay, so it is a recorded vote, members, and could I have a proposer, please, for the adoption of these recommendations? Councillor Sims, thank you. Seconder, please, Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? That's unanimous.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So item 12 on our agenda is the annual Treasury Management Strategy 2019-20, which is also the report of our 151 officer, Russell. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The Treasury Management Strategy for the year is, again, a statutory report that we have to bring to members because we need them to approve our strategy for the year to deal with our Treasury activity. It is part, really, of the budget setting process, but we've kept it as a separate paper here because it's still quite a lengthy document. Basically, it sets out the Council's borrowing and investment strategy for the forthcoming 12 months. It sets out what we call our prudential indicators, which are indicators we have to set, again, by law, that says the level of borrowing that we are able to take compared with our financial position. It's based on our capital financing requirement, and our capital financing requirement is based on how we funded the previous capital programs over the last X number of years and what we're anticipating funding going forward. It sets out what our limits on borrowing should be and how we should borrow, the level of borrowing, the mixture between short and long-term borrowing, and it also sets out how we should invest any surplus funds if we want to do so. In that instance, it says the creditworthiness that we would require of anyone we invest with, the length of time we would invest with them, that's all set out in the detail of this strategy. The strategy is there. If you've read it, I'll be happy to answer questions. But as I say, it basically covers our Treasury activity and it's a statutory requirement to agree that strategy for the year.
Thank you, Russell. Councillor Sims.
I'd like to propose the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Just got a question, please. Just on page 114 regarding the investment strategy. It's kind of, clear the kind of reasons why the investment strategy is like that, but can ethics of the investment form part of our strategy? For example, whether our money indeed was invested in things like fossil fuels or arms companies and things like that, and whether going forward that should form part of our investment strategy.
Thank you, Russell.
I think that's a very good point, and I think it probably should. It's probably an omission that's in there at the moment. It's probably not covered if it is covered in sufficient detail. And it probably is an amendment we should make going forward. I think we've got a couple of opportunities in the year. The Treasury strategy should be reviewed at the outturn and it should be reviewed at the mid-year. So I think at one of those two that we could probably add an ethical statement to the strategy.
Okay, therefore, can I propose an extra recommendation, an ethical statement on the Treasury management is brought back to Council in the near future?
Happy with that.
Thank you.
So that's a proposal for... Okay.
You're seconding?
Second.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a proposal for the recommendation of the approval of the annual Treasury Management Strategy with a report coming back further shortly. Yeah. So we have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. So item 13 on the agenda is fees and charges. This is, again, the report of our 151 officer and also our senior manager for infrastructure. So, Craig, thank
Chairman,
you.
if I can introduce this, obviously the report sets out the fees and charges for a raft of services for the coming year. You'll see that they're attached to the appendix of the report. Generally, we're proposing to increase fees and charges by the latest consumer price index, which stands at 2.3%. But obviously, there are variances to using CPI, and that's mostly due to cost recovery issues with particular services. I would point out, actually, that in terms of Active Silly and Move Silly, I'm going to propose an additional recommendation because there are some fees and charges potentially that might come forward as an opportunity through Active Silly and Move Silly. So I'm recommending an additional recommendation, and that's to approve delegated powers to the senior manager for strategic development to set prices for for Active Silly and Move Silly promotional and taster sessions, which aren't currently set out in the report. So there's quite a lot of work that's going on in terms of new opportunities, and that includes such things as laser tag and Nerf gun invert games, which sounds absolutely brilliant fun. So there's some great opportunities, I think, coming forward for Active Silly and Move Silly to actually get people more active in the community and obviously generate more income.
Thank you. Councillor Grottek.
I was just going to ask if you would like to, if we could amend it in consultation with perhaps the lead member for children, as that has such an impact on the wellbeing agenda.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to propose an amendment to the budget, to the fees and charges. With regards to the burial fees, we discussed this at last time we did this. At the moment, we are charging burial fees for babies and children. Talking to a number of other councillors, I believe this is quite immoral, really. I think if parents find themselves in that dreadful situation of having to bury children, I think as a compassionate council, we should actually cover that cost ourselves, and hopefully that will be a very rare event anyway. So I'd like to, and in fact, a colleague actually showed that this is actually going to form part of national legislation anyway now. So I propose that we scrap those charges. So that would be my first additional recommendation. I'd also like to propose that I'm pleased to see that a lot of the charges are going by inflation of 2.3%. I am going to propose that the water charges, which affect everyone on St Mary's and Briar, actually only go up by 2.3% as well. I understand why the additional charges were come into force, because we had a very dry summer and additional cost pressures. However, I think we should be managing our accounts in a way in which we have good years and bad years, and that we should use reserves to cover those extra costs, because these are all additional cost pressures on people living here. We're putting up council tax, we're proposing to put up airport fees, putting up water fees, all above inflation. And personally, I don't find that acceptable, and I think that the electorate would agree with me. So those are my two additional recommendations, proposals for recommendations.
Yeah. So could I please just deal with those extra recommendations first? You've proposed the extra recommendation, Jonathan, Councillor Smith, for the delegation, is that right? And do I have a seconder for that, please?
Delegation. I don't think I actually proposed that one, but I'm happy to propose it.
Well, I thought...
So Craig suggested an amendment. Jonathan's now adopting that amendment about the delegation. So yes, you're proposing that.
I will propose that.
As well.
Yeah. So we're taking Craig's first, and you're proposing it.
I'll happily propose that.
I'll second that.
All those in favour, please. Thank you.
And then my second proposal was around the burial fees of babies and children. So I would therefore state that all under 18s, the burial fee should be scrapped.
Right. And
Could I just come in on that one? I've got to apologise. My iPad hasn't worked for 10 days, so I got it literally 5 minutes before the meeting and saw a sort of flow of emails relating to this. But independently, fortuitously, I was looking last night at something called the Child's Funeral Fund, which doesn't make. But the Prime Minister announced it last year, and in theory, all under 18s are entitled for the state to pay for burials and cremations. What I'm not sure of is if there are any exemptions clauses which might mean Silly sits outside that for any reason. So if we could just ask officers to look into that. But the bottom line is parents shouldn't be paying for the funeral fund, for funeral costs. There is a fund set up, but it's just a case of making sure that we fit into that.
Thank you. Before we vote on this second recommendation, Russell, have you as a 151 officer got any comment to make on that?
No, I think that the figures we're talking about are so low that there's no impact on the budget that I would be worried about.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Sims.
On that saying, I think we, as much as possible, we should definitely avoid people having to fill in forms in those circumstances as well.
Yeah. So, on the second recommendation that we cancel those fees for children under
18s.
Yeah. The proposer is Jonathan, seconder, Councillor Marcus. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried.
And then, sorry, my my other proposal was around water fees, that they should be capped at a 2.3% increase, not a approximately 5% increase as proposed in the fees and charges.
Are there any comments about this before we take a seconder? Councillor Rogers.
Sorry, yes, it was, yes.
Any Russell, any comments on that?
No, no comments. It's not detrimental on the budget.
Okay. Councillor Grottick.
I think this is very difficult, but I would say that I don't think as an authority we've been charging enough for water over the recent past. So it's now a question of playing catch up. And I think if you do that, then obviously it impacts on other service delivery. I'll just make that comment. And perhaps Craig would like to comment.
I'd just like to say that the 151 officer said it's not detrimental on the budget, so.
Craig, do you wish to comment?
Chairman, the one thing I would say is that actually we have aligned ourselves over the years a little bit more with the mainland situation in terms of our fees and charges for water. And I'm conscious that particularly for our domestic customers, of course, that we don't offer metering because of the resource implications. So moving forward, actually that will have some implications for households on the islands, and the chances are that those smaller households will actually probably gain, but obviously some of those larger households, particularly where they've got some informal visitor accommodation, are likely to have higher rates of pay. So I think it's relatively, equitable at the moment in terms of our charges on the basis of the mainland. But obviously this year we have had some significant additional operational costs because of some of the issues that we faced last year.
Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I support this proposal. I think it's just when other items are going up, like Jonathan said, 2.99% for council tax, police precept as well. It's good that we can absorb some of the extra costs. So I would second that proposal.
Okay. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Any against? 2. Jonathan's proposal's carried then on the capping of that. Do we have any further comments, please, on the fees and charges? Okay, we have the recommendation with the various ones we've already approved, that to approve the proposed fees and charges as set out in the appendage schedule to the report for the financial year 2019 to 2020. Can I have a proposer, please, for that? Councillor Marcus, seconder. Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. So item 14 on the agenda is the staff pay review for 2019-2020 and the report of our officer policy and scrutiny.
No, it's fine. Chairman, if I can take this.
Okay.
This pay review is something that obviously all councils need to do, particularly in the context of the national living wage. The report, as you'll see, sets out 5 options and really looks at 3 key objectives. One is implementing a fair and transparent pay and grading system for council staff. Second one is meeting employment legislation, and also ensuring that we actually adopt a consistent approach in terms of how we pay. So based on those objectives and looking at each of those options, you'll see that the preferred option is option 3. And that also is, in terms of probably the most cost-effective solution, and certainly mitigates any cost implications, but also more closely aligns and matches our current existing pay structure. So the recommendation, I think, is very clear that members approve option 3, which has been allowed for as well in the proposed budget.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I totally support members of staff getting national living wage, but I can't make head nor tail of this report. I don't understand it. I can't follow it. It's really badly presented. So I would like to propose to defer this report to next month when it can come back with so I can actually make head or tail of it. I understand we need to, and we can backdate paid staff when we approve it. But I can't make a decision on this because I don't get it at all.
Councillor Sims.
Similar, but briefly, what does SCP stand for? Because it's all throughout the report.
That's the spinal point.
Okay, I thought spinal was in there. What's the C then? Column.
Sorry, spinal column.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So it's sort of vertebrae.
Sorry. Sorry, Chairman, can I just come back on the issue raised by Councillor Dan Marcus? It's imperative, actually, that we do review the staff pay by the 1st of April 2019. So members do need to make a decision. And if the report perhaps does seem somewhat confusing, it's because actually that this is actually quite a difficult subject.
I don't buy that at all. I'm sorry. I can't make a decision because I haven't got the information in front. Well, I have, but it's just not in a format that I can understand. I'm sorry. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but.
Craig, can I ask, please, if, as Councillor Marcus has asked, if it's agreed at next council in April and pay is backdated, is that acceptable or not?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So we've had a proposal from Councillor Marcus as this is deferred to the next council meeting. Sorry, before I take that, Councillor Smith.
Well, I was just going to support that proposal as well. I am in agreement with Councillor Marcus, and I think not only just to view it at next full council, but to have a workshop before that to actually understand this properly.
Thank you. So we've had a proposal to defer and a seconder. Sorry, Councillor Sims.
Well, I suggest perhaps Craig could do 2 minutes on it now, and if that may make it acceptable, I don't know.
No, that doesn't seem to be acceptable. So could I have a vote, please, now on that proposition that we defer this till the next meeting, and we'll try and have a presentation to members in the interim. So could I please see those in favour of that proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Any against? One. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. So item 15 on the agenda is the airport commercial fees and charges for 2019-2020. Again, report of our Senior Manager for Infrastructure and Planning, Craig. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, as a council, we do have responsibility to set commercial fees and charges for the airport. I think it's important that we make recommendations, we make decisions in the best interests of the airport, including obviously its financial viability moving forward. You'll see from the report that the financial issues around the airport are fairly precarious, and that's because obviously passenger numbers over the years have decreased, or certainly not at the levels that they were 10 years plus, and that has had a corresponding impact in terms of the income. And at a time as well over the years where the cost pressures of the airport have also increased as well, particularly to meet the requirements of the Civil Aviation Authority, but also because of the world of aviation is incredibly competitive. And as the report alludes, one of the current pressures clearly is there's a shortage of air traffic controllers, and that's created a very competitive market. It's important that the airport just doesn't meet its income or its operational requirements on an annual basis. It's also important that it meets also its indirect costs, whether that's management support or even other service support. And also, of course, more importantly, or as importantly, it also needs to invest or make investments moving forward. And certainly in a 20-year period, the sorts of investments required at the airport total around £8 million. Obviously, a big part of that is obviously the resurfacing of the runways, which probably needs to take place every 20 years, but obviously that's dependent on friction tests. So you'll see from the report that we're assuming optimistically that passenger numbers will increase by about 3% next year. Currently, we anticipate we'll get 94,000 passengers, both departing and arriving at the airport. That's actually less than we assumed last year when we set fees and charges. We were anticipating 98,000. But there is, if you look at the trends over the last 5 or 6 years, there is actually a small rise in overall terms in terms of passenger numbers, but subject to obviously blips. One of the issues I think for this year, of course, is that we don't have Easter in this financial year, but we do have Easter the next financial year, and those sorts of things do make a difference. So I'm recommending, on the basis of the current financial situation of the airport, that we increase fees and charges, commercial fees and charges, by 10%. Obviously, it's a balancing act as well, because obviously we're conscious that the more passengers we get through the airport, that actually drives income as well. So we are looking at an incentive whereby that we will reduce fees and charges, but only subject to receiving 97,000 passengers arriving and departing at the airport. So you have 3 recommendations before you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any questions, Councillor Mumford?
Well, I'd like to make the suggestion that we scrub recommendation 3 altogether, because I don't think we'll reach that bit. I'm not in favour of going up by 10% because I think we're going to have a knock-on effect. I think the flights will then go up. I think flights are, I don't think we want them to go up anymore. I would propose an increase of 5%.
Okay, well, shall we just hear some more debate first? Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Well, I want to make a general point. The net social and economic benefits of the airport to the islands are massive. They far outweigh what's on the airport balancing books. And obviously there is airport numbers less than 100%. 100,000. There's a degree of fragility at the airport because of the low numbers, but with the same token, there's a degree of fragility for the operator because the numbers are low. And it's the cake is basically the councils and the operators, and you've got to share it up. And we've all received a missive from the steamship company saying that this is going to be a problem for them. I'm reluctantly going to go with the 10% because we have to protect the airport. That's absolutely vital, but we need to be cogent that this isn't really sustainable in the long term unless we get sufficient numbers, because the airport cannot cover its capital costs going forward, as Craig just alluded to, and to get the £8 million off any operators over the course of the next 20 years is not conceivably going to happen. So we do need, as we discussed earlier today, but not in here, in this particular meeting, we do need to look at the capital program for the airport, and that is going to be investigated, and it's going to come forward later on. But as an interim step, I don't really see we've got much of an option than to go with the 10%, given the fragility of the airport finances. So I reluctantly would propose all three of these.
Thank you. I'm just going to suspend the debate for a moment because our 151 officer and our monitoring officer have to leave to catch a flight. Otherwise, they aren't going to get away today because the flight's been brought earlier.
Well, I should do it before we set the charges.
They would love to say. But before they go, I forgot to mention this earlier when we were doing the budget and mentioning what a good paper it was. But I didn't thank our senior managers particularly, and obviously indeed Russell, for the immense work that they put in to actually achieve a balanced budget. We were told last November that we were going to have a deficit of nearly £500,000, and between them, with a fortunate help we managed to receive from the LGA in their advice, the senior managers and Russell have managed to get us into the position that we are without cutting services. So it's a big thank you to them, and also, as been mentioned, Russell in managing to find the reserves, mainly from grants that hadn't been claimed and so on, which has put us in a much better position. So I just would like that recorded. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So on that note, we'll go back to the debate now on the airport commercial fees. Councillor Grottig.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask Craig, in a spirit of recognising that this is going to be a stress factor for the sole operator, I think I'm allowed to say, what would be the effect? Could we manage if we triggered the discount at 95,000, which will probably be more achievable? Would that be a middle way?
Chairman, I think that's a good suggestion, but that's dependent. That's dependent in terms of what members agree, actually, fees and charges. So, bearing in mind that the budget has been set, assuming that fees and charges at the airport will be 10%. I think personally, I think 5% will give us a budget gap, not just at the airport, but I think in terms of our overall budget. So you're talking about a difference of just over £73,000. But certainly, there's no reason why, if members were to go above 7% and preferably to 10% as recommended, that we couldn't have actually the trigger as an incentive to be slightly lower.
I was intending voting for the 10%. I'm not suggesting that we move down from the 10%, but I'm recognising the stress that this will put on our sole operator, and I think this might be a middle way, because I would personally hope that we might have, if we have Brexit, I think it might well help our tourism industry, although regardless of anything else that might happen. So therefore, I think 95,000 is achievable. And if we all worked, obviously they would be then working very hard to achieve that. And I think that might be a middle way. But that would, I would support 10% very, very reluctantly.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
If you'd like to propose that, I would very happily second that.
I do propose that we keep to the existing recommendations, but that we change the discount trigger to 95,000 passengers rather than 97.
Yeah, I think actually, first of all, though, Councillor Mumford, you had an original proposal, did you? Or yeah. So would you like to spell out what that is, please?
I would like to propose that the airport charges go up by 5%. And recommendation 3 is struck together.
So is there a seconder for Councillor Mumford's proposal? Councillor Smith. So all those in favour? That's 2. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So that's defeated, I'm afraid. We have, can we hear Councillor Roger before we take your proposal? Please, Councillor Groddick.
Look at the figures, this is a capital investment issue, not an operational profit and loss issue at the airport. So even though the airport is a profit and loss success, it's capital is its issue. We're not going forward to separate these two things in our discussions with debates and take the capital side of operation to a different debate on discussions with Westminster, etc. Because tourism element of the operation works and is getting better annually at the moment. And hopefully with the secondary service coming next year, that will improve even further, although there is risk involved in that, obviously, the second arrival point. So my point is I just want to see these two things separated more going forward rather than left together. And we can base our fees and charges on the actual P&L of this operation rather than the more stressful capital element.
I would like to thank you. I would like to just comment from the chair that we did, prior to this meeting, have some discussion about the airport, and we have decided as members that we will be bringing a report before council very shortly on the viability of the airport and indeed the capital costs of the airport going forward. So I'm just wondering, Councillor Roger, whether that will satisfy you on this. Thank you. So we have, well, okay, Councillor Smith.
Well,
next.
just to add to that, I'd agree with Councillor Roger and just what you said, Chair, regarding that. Could I suggest that just as a recommendation to Councillor Grottick's proposal, that the full paper for capital programme comes back to us within 6 months?
Yep.
To formalise it.
No, absolutely, happy with that. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Grottick.
I'd just like to say that I think we should have a full report on all aspects of the viability and funding of the airport. I think, with great respect, that was a little bit narrow just to look at the capital aspects. So I think
I did assure members that we would.
That was why I was just clarifying for the benefit
Yeah.
of clarity with my proposal. But that's fine.
Thank you. So can we go back to your recommendation, Councillor Grottick, please?
Right, I would propose that we take now 4 recommendations, and that recommendation 3, the discount trigger becomes 95,000 passengers rather than 97, and that a full report on the viability and funding of the airport be brought back to full council as soon as possible.
And within 6 months?
Yes. Yeah. Fine.
So is there a seconder for Councillor Grottick's proposal?
I would second it. Just
Councillor Sims.
A brief and further comment.
Okay.
Very brief. We'll get this report, but I think we do need to bear in mind that the money is either going to come from the airport, from the council, or externally. So, you know, having a paper in a few months' time doesn't alter the problem. We still have to get this money from somewhere for the capital programme, and we're going to have to, hopefully we can get it externally. That would be marvellous, but otherwise it's going to have to be paid for here, one way or the other.
Thank you. So we have 4 recommendations, 3 of them as they stand here, except that item recommendation 3 is amended from £97,000 down to, 97,000 passengers down to 95,000 passengers. And there's an extra recommendation, item 4, to say that there will be a report brought before council as soon as possible and within 6 months on the viability of St Mary's Airport and indeed the capital requirements as well for St Mary's Airport. Councillor Grottick.
Apologies for interrupting, but it is actually down to 95,000 passenger journeys, not passengers.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so we have that proposal and we have a seconder. All those in favour, please. 1, 2, 3, 6. Any against, please? 2.
However, I do support recommendation 4.
Yes, as well.
Thank you. Right. Item 17 on the agenda is the community fund applications. The report, is that of Joseph? Thank you.
So this report relates to 2 applications to the community fund. As members will be aware, the council sets aside an annual budget of £3,500 for a community fund to give financial assistance to any organisation where it considers this will be likely to promote the economic, social or environmental well-being of the islands. As I say, we've received 2 applications, both of which have been properly submitted in accordance with community fund policy. The first application is from the Arthur City Folk Club, who are requesting a grant of £1,500 to support the Folk Festival in May 2019. The grants of £500 have been made on several occasions in the past, but the organisers are requesting an increased grant for 2019 so they can expand the festival to include workshops and additional bands. The application also notes that there is less chance this year of free accommodation for visiting acts. I've spoken to the applicant in the last couple of days, and they've confirmed that the Folk Club will be incurring an additional charge this year of £300 for camping costs because they don't have access anymore. As a new organising committee, they don't have access to free accommodation that they've had in the past. The second application is from the St Mary's Theatre Club.
I realised I should have declared an interest in the second one. Is it possible to deal with the first one first, and I can leave the room for the second one?
Yes.
Okay.
The second application is from the St Mary's Theatre Club, which is.
I've got to leave the room. If we can deal with the first one first, if that's okay.
So shall I propose then that we have the Float Club can get their full allocation of 1,500.
That's proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please. Was that 5? Any against? 1. Sorry, I should have heard you, Joel, before we've taken the vote.
I've got little sympathy for either application, to be perfectly honest. Folk Club have had it 5 years out of 6. Theatre Club are applying for £300 when they've got £11,500 in the bank already. It doesn't seem a particularly innovative way for us to use our funding. I'd like to propose a third recommendation that, as an authority, we undertake a full review of the community fund process to assess whether it offers best value for money. It just seems like we give the same people the same funding for the same thing year after year after year. I'm very conscious there's all sorts of great causes out there who might not be aware of this, who haven't had funding for 5 out of 6 years, don't have £11,500 in a bank account. So it just seems to me a bit unimaginative, to say the least. And that's my miser Scrooge.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
I'll second that because I do think, with the state of our council funding at the moment, we should be monitoring issues like this. So I'm happy to support your recommendation, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Puts me in a slightly difficult position, members, because obviously I've taken a vote before you've heard the full amount, but we were rushed a bit with Councillor Sims leaving the room. Are members happy that we stick with the original vote, or would you like a further vote? Okay, please. Yeah.
It gives them time to plan, doesn't it?
Yeah. Councillor Sims, I'm sorry, we didn't hear Councillor Williams in full, who has made a further recommendation. And he's also explained to us that the Folk Club have some reserves of their own, and he's concerned about whether there's various other community interests out there, and he's suggesting that we should reconsider and actually have a full review of the community fund and its value for money. in due course. So we're actually going to take the vote again, please, as to whether or not we are going to support the community fund application from the Silly Folk Club, or whether we defer it to a full review in due course. Councillor Marcus.
This is about the community fund for 18-19, isn't it? So there's £3,500 left in this pot for the next 2 months, correct? I would say we're not going to get a review done in the next 2 months about the community fund. And there's money, the community fund is budgeted for next year as well. So we could roll it forward, yeah.
I was making a point, Steve, that Theatre Club, and I know you've got an interest to declare, have got, by their own accounts, their accounts are buoyant. They've got £11,500-ish in the accounts, in their accounts, according to the paperwork submitted. It seems wrong to me for us to be giving them an amount of money when they're pretty well off by any small club standards. And I also made the point that Folk Club have had funding from this pot of money for 5 out of the last 6 years. It almost seems to be a bit of a dependency. And I think they're more innovative, more worthwhile, more valuable projects out there who we could support. And I had a very good conversation with Rob Rochelle from Cornwall last week, who said that their style is that each elected member, this is just part of a review potentially, each elected member in Cornwall is given a pot of money to spend in their ward, and that is then decided by that elected member and their colleagues. And it just seems to take away some of this process we have at the moment, where perhaps fund clubs and organisations who know about this get their finger in the pie. And I've got absolutely no issue at all with either of the organisations. Avril and I had a lovely evening with Theatre Club last week. It just doesn't seem to me the most efficient, the most effective and best use of what is relatively a small pot of money, which could make a lot of difference to some other groups.
So can we please just go back to the first recommendation on the Folk Club, and we need to decide whether or not we're going to approve this or not. So could I please have a proposal, first of all, on the Folk Club?
Well, notwithstanding what Jill said, I'm happy to propose it.
That's proposed and seconded that we approve the community fund application for the Folk Club of £1,500 to support the Folk Festival 2019. All those in favour? 2. Those against? 5. So that's not carried. Would you please leave the room, Steve? Thank you. So can we please now discuss the Theatre Club? Joseph, thank you.
So the second application is from the St Mary's Theatre Club. This is requesting a grant of £315 to support the One Act Play Festival scheduled for May 2019. In addition, they've also requested a grant of £300 a year for each remaining year of the council's term to support the festivals in 2020 and 2021. The council did make a grant of £340 to support the festival last year. With respect to the request for a grant for each remaining year of the term, perhaps worth mentioning that members have already approved a similar arrangement for the Christmas Lights Fund, whereby councillors agreed to provide £700 a year for each year of this council's term. So there is a precedent for that sort of arrangement. The only expenditure that's been made from the community fund this year has been the Christmas Lights Fund, £700. So the balance currently stands at £2,800. It's perhaps worth mentioning that members have the option of approving the amounts as they stand, or they can choose to approve a reduced amount if that is preferable. But yeah, apart from that, it's whether or not members would like to approve the second application.
So any comments, please, about the Theatre Club? No, well, we have a recommendation that we determine the approval of £315 to support a one-act play festival in 2019 and £300 a year for each remaining year of this council's term to support the one-act play festivals in 2020 and 2021, subject to the written confirmation that a one-act play festival is being held in those years. So can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Watt, seconded by... No seconder. So clearly that's going to fail as well. Thank you. So that's not happening. And we have been asked as a third recommendation. Sorry?
I think we need to make a specific decision in terms of recommendation. So not going to approve.
Okay. You will, right. So we've got a proposer and seconder. All those in favour? Right, so it's... yeah, those against? It's 5.
Now we need another recommendation on the table as well.
Yes. That's what I was going to do. Item 3, recommendation 3, is that we have a full review of the community fund and its value for money. Can I have a proposer for that, please? Well, Joel's proposed it. Seconder, Councillor Mumford.
Can I just make, it's not about value for money, it's about the actual proposal and the process. Value for money, I think, is we don't, I think that's going to be really hard to measure. So it's about the process and the publicity rounds.
Well, would you like to just clarify the proposal, please, Councillor Williams? Yes, of course.
I think what you're talking about is you're reviewing a criteria for allocation, aren't you? So it's the criteria against which funding will be allocated. So there's a clear methodology, and that criteria can be publicised so that more people might be attracted to the fund. So I think it's around review of the process, including the criteria for allocation, to ensure effective and efficient use of funding, including the promotion and marketing of the community fund to wider groups.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a proposer for that and a seconder, Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Apologies, members, for the rather messy dealing with that item, but it was a bit complicated. Thank you. We now have part 2 reports for information only, unless we have any questions, please. Okay, so we now need a vote, please, to exclude the public and press from part 3. Could I have a proposer? Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? Thank you. Sorry.
I think if you feel confident from,
okay. Yeah, of course. Yeah.